Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this open lecture today. I have the unbelievable pleasure of introducing my new friend, Rupa Marya, that I've only met recently through other people in the audience. So, sorry, I'm very formal looking. I was meeting the Premier of Edward Island in Canada today, so that's why I'm all done up. I'll loosen my tie here. So I want to tell a little story by way of introduction to Rupa, because it really kind of grounds what she's going to talk about. So I work as a doctor up in James's Hospital, and I've been there for 20 years. And I used to hear stories about the history of James's, which were kind of interesting. And it used to be a workhouse. But I started to delve into the real history, and it's both shocking and illuminating, and has so much to do with what Rupa is talking about that I think it's worth just telling you a little bit about it. So in 1697, Dublin Corporation decided they were going to build a workhouse in Dublin on the outskirts of the city. And the reason for that was to put the undeserving poor to work, because they were vagabonds and wasters, and particularly they wanted the children, because they would put them into apprenticeships and get them working. And so in 1703, they built the workhouse, which was really like an army barracks. It had a very high wall all around it. And there's one remaining building on the site of James's Hospital called the Old Stone Building, which is the original building. So if you ever go into James's, you'll see it on the right-hand side as you go in. And that's one of the original buildings. And the whole place looked like that. And between 1703 and 1830, when the workhouse closed, 127,000 children were registered as entering to that place. We only know what happened to 27,000 of them. So 100,000 children disappeared over a century, about 800 or 900 a year. And we don't know what happened to them. And we suspect they're buried on the site in some places. We know for a fact that 5,300 children died in a 6-year period just being admitted to the so-called infirmary in the workhouse. That was supposed where they're supposed to get better. These were all the infants who died. And why is that important? Because I think it's important for the following reasons. One is, what is the reckoning that we have done as people with that history? I'm from Dublin 8. My father was a cooper in Guinness's. He left school at 14. His whole family lived in Vernon Street, which is right in the heart of Dublin 8, beside the old Meath Hospital. And I'm wondering, we now know from scientific work around what's called epigenetics, is that your genes are affected by the trauma of the past. And the question is, what effect is that having on the health of the city of Dublin now, that we had 100,000 children disappear? And the death of children, of course, is on all of our minds these days. And what is the reckoning with that that's happening? And everything Rupa is going to talk about today is going to be about the effect of exclusion, of injustice, of colonialization on the health and well-being of ordinary people, both in the past and currently. That's why it's so important to talk about that. Rupa is a physician. She works, she's a professor of medicine at UCSF Medical Center. It's like one of the best hospitals in the world, but on anyone's metric. So she knows, this is not, a peripheral thing for her. She's seeing this day in, day out in the hospital. So she's over here today. She gave an amazing talk this morning at Grand Rounds with hardened clinicians from James's Hospital. And it was clear some of them didn't get it, but did that usual polite thing that Dublin people do. They went out and gave out about her out in the corridor. They were all very polite to your face. But it's really astounding stuff. And it's the future. I mean, it is the future of our world, but it's the future of medicine as well. And I think for those of you who are in the medical school who are here, I'm going to need your help in getting what's central to Rupa's message into the medical curriculum for the future. So I welcome collaborating on that. Rupa.
All right. Oh, can you make sure there's no volume? There's so much videos, but I don't need any volume.
I know, it should be. Turn down music.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Thank you for that amazing introduction, Colin. I just want to say thank you for inviting me to be here with you. Thank you to the provost for coming to hear this work. Thank you to my new friend Kleena for welcoming me so beautifully with the Inclusion Health team. To my college roommate Debbie, which is why I'm here, Dr. Debbie, the new neurologist in the Inclusion Health team. I also just want to acknowledge and thank the ancestors, especially those little ancestors of this land that Colin just invoked, the people and beings here that hold the knowledge of this land, and thank my own ancestors for calling me here and calling me to this work and to this path. So my name is Rupa, and that was my last music video I shot before COVID hit. I'm also a musician. I'm a touring musician who's been on the road for about 17 years with a band, Rupa and the April Fishes. And it is through music that this inquiry came about, because I use my band, I use my music as a way to go and understand the intersections between health and society. Now, if you go touring around the world with a band versus your stethoscope and a clipboard, you're going to get very different access into communities. And when you go with a band, people open their doors, they bring you to their homes, they sit you down, they give you their food, and then they tell you what's going on in their communities. And what I learned was fascinating. And I started to see that there was this syndrome of diseases that I called at that time the colonized person syndrome, because they were overly expressed in people who had lived through colonial trauma, and their societies were still trembling from that trauma, or still impacted by it. And I started to see that there were systems and peoples living on the earth that had no relationship to those ways of being and thinking, who had whole other ways of seeing things and doing things. And I started to learn that actually all of our ancestral lineages had other ways of doing and seeing things that we have forgotten. And it's not that we forgot it because whoops, it just disappeared. It's because those ways of being and thinking were purposefully extinguished. And the planet, our bodies, and our societies are hurting because of that. So I'm going to talk about that today. I hope that what I have to share here is, these are seeds, these are stories. I'm a storyteller, I'm an artist, I'm a doctor, I'm a mom. But the insights I share really come to you as a storyteller. And how do I advance these slides? Let's see. Arrow up. Oh, click. 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 Okay, click. Okay, so I am a musician turned farmer. So when COVID hit, I started to feel really guilty about getting up in front of people and having them breathe on each other and get COVID. So I started learning more how to bring my practice that I was seeing on the road into my practice for my patients, for my communities. I come from a Sikh ancestry. I come from a Hindu ancestry. In my ancestry, it is our duty to feed our community. Nobody goes hungry. It's a part of our faith. It's a part of what we do. And doing that work for the people of my community, my patients who come in who are eating the food that we grew and gave away 50,000 pounds of organic food last year from these farms that we're working on. It blows my mind to see how they've been impacted by the care that we're giving. And it really has thrown me into a deep commitment in this work. I shared these insights as a daughter of immigrants. So my parents immigrated from Punjab. I was born and raised in occupied, unceded Ohlone territories, what's now called the San Francisco Bay Area, in the homelands of the Ohlone people who are still there. So just 40 minutes south of San Francisco, I spent a childhood roaming through the redwood groves, through the Oakland savannas, and I could feel an ancient presence there on the land that didn't match the strip malls that I saw, that didn't match the highways. We weren't getting the real story of what was happening there. So I spent my time trying to understand what it was I was sensing that reminded me of my grandmother's village in India. What was that ancient presence? And I started to learn about the history, the California genocide, that happened around a similar time here as the Great Starvation of Ireland. I started to learn the histories of my parents coming here because of the $62 trillion worth of wealth that was stolen from our homeland in India, that the starvation in Ireland had a similar starvation through India, where over I think it was excess mortality of 165 million people perished between 1880 and 1920 because of British colonial policies. So the processes of colonialism that led to my birth so far away from the homelands also made me keenly aware of my relationship to place and our body's relationship to power over time. I share these insights with you as a physician who practices internal medicine, hospital medicine. I say that my work puts me at the bleeding edge of society so I can see who's hurt and how they're hurt and what the breakdowns are. It's a tremendous privilege to practice medicine in that way. But my medicine really comes from a liberation framework. And it was when these 5 people went on hunger strike who were pushing in the wheelchairs to go down to meet the mayor of San Francisco because Black and brown people were being shot by the police in San Francisco to make way for the new tech overlords who were moving in who wanted our housing. Here in Dublin and Ireland, I see you have a similar housing shortage that we have had for now 20 years. In San Francisco, with very similar policies through these companies that categorically change our relationship to how we take care of our community members. But my teachers haven't only been my professors in medical school, they've been the people who are coming from the most oppressed communities in San Francisco Bay Area. And those are my elders, the youth in the movement, the elders in the movement for Indigenous sovereignty, the elders in the movement for Black lives, the poor people's movement, the disability justice activists, the earth protectors, agroecological farmers, people who are doing this kind of work. They really taught me what it means to be a doctor. And when I started moving my medicine into the streets to do what every good musician does, which is accompany people, it really showed me the power of understanding how what's making us sick in the hospital is also making our communities sick in the streets. How it's making us sick in the streets is also making our planet sick to the point that we're on fire or under floods. So these kinds of dysregulations, these themes became very clear to me. And I share these insights as an activist myself who works to advance health through addressing the structural issues that make health impossible. This is me listening to the Dakota Access Pipeline. I was called by California Native people to Standing Rock to help build the Standing Rock or help do the response as the grandmothers were getting beaten by the police and hired mercenaries to try to put this pipeline through the clean drinking water of Mini-Chauchet, or what's called the Missouri River, that the tribe was trying to stop. And that experience was incredible to me, to see how the grandmothers were working with these young Indigenous activists to plant willows and cottonwoods every day they could to slow that pipeline down. And when they slowed that pipeline down, it changed the economic calculus of putting pipelines through North America. And in fact, Indigenous-led pipeline movements are the single greatest contributor to the drop of greenhouse gases in the last several years, which is incredible if you think about it. It's not about your stainless steel straw or about your Elon's electric car. It's about the collective movement to change the economic calculations. So the things I'm going to share today, just as a quick pause. So there was a doctor in the 1840s who said, you know, we're noticing that women who deliver their babies with doctors die 5 times more than the women who deliver them with midwives. And so he suggested that perhaps it was because the doctors were coming straight from the autopsy room to the delivery rooms without washing their hands. And he's like, well, maybe we should be washing our hands. And he was laughed out of the university. He lost his job. I think he died like lonely and miserable. But in fact, the act of washing hands for physicians in our care, all healthcare workers, has led to the saving of billions and billions of lives after poor Semmelweis. So I just say that to say some of these ideas that I share are very unpopular in medicine because we have not been trained to think about whole systems health. We've been trained to atomize and go as small and reductive as possible. And I think we need to keep understanding the tiny minutiae of precision medicines and molecules and how they interact. But at the same time, I argue that we need to go wide in the other direction. So the microscopic and the macroscopic things that are impacting health. And I formed this organization that we call the Deep Medicine Circle to do that work because it could not be held yet in a university. And this work is really looking at how our structures have changed and how we can change them differently. So structural problems require structural solutions. That is the definition of deep medicine. It comes from the concept of deep ecology, which is ecology above and beyond what just serves humans. medicine and health, the way we understand it, is not simply an attribute of one person. It's something that emerges when systems are harmonizing together. So it requires a systems level analysis. So what we've done with the Deep Medicine Circle is bringing together many different disciplines and peoples. So we work with indigenous and non-indigenous people, diasporic peoples. We work with farmers and ecologists and doctors and nurses and students. We work with lawyers and economists and all of these different kinds of people, different kinds of healers, to start looking at the problems that we face together and coming up with new stories. Deep Medicine Circle, we say our purpose is to heal the wounds of colonialism through food, medicine, storytelling, restoration, and learning. We understand that our world has changed structurally over the last 600 years in ways that are still impacting humanity and the web of life around us. Colonialism and the economic system that it was paired with at the time, capitalism, the last wave of global colonialism, have created the most lasting, damaging impacts in living systems, to living systems, that the planet Earth has ever seen. Although some people like to argue that colonialism is a past tense event, we recognize it as an ongoing, recreated experience, and that the structures and attitudes that were created at the time of invasion are very much still alive and are exerting a negative impact on the health of humans and the health of the web of life that supports us. Colonial capitalism restructured ancient ways that we all related to each other and to the web of life that supports our health in the very specific places where we come from. So even though colonial capitalism showed up differently in Ireland than it did in India, than it did in Turtle Island or North America, the impact was actually the same and characterized by broken relationships. And those broken relationships lead to what we're going to look at, which is inflammation of our bodies, inflammation of our social dynamics, and inflammation of the planet. We have been severed from our sense of knowing who we are through our languages, through our land practices, through our foods, through our native medicines, and through our duties to care for one another, by a worldview that supports this domination and economic order that rewards people who do the most damage and harms a great majority of the beings on planet Earth. In my own lifetime, in the last 50 years, there has been a loss of over 73% of wildlife on planet Earth. That's just astounding to me. So I'm 49 years old. Since I've been alive, 3/4 of the wildlife on planet Earth is gone. And while Ireland has gotten rid, or the Republic of Ireland has gotten rid of its colonial force, the processes of decolonization are actually not complete. Most people don't remember traditional Irish ways of being in relationship, of supporting one another, of taking care of each other and taking care of land. And so when the structures and attitudes remain intact, they beg to be reimagined for the whole system to thrive. What's exciting about this work is that these structures that we will discuss are engineered, and it gives us an opportunity to re-engineer them in better ways that serve the health of all. And this is a great time to do it, because systems that focus on the health of all are more resilient systems. So before the last wave of colonial conquests, this island was a place where 80% of the landmass was covered in an ancient Atlantic rainforest. This was a place that was said that a squirrel could go from one side of the island to the other without ever touching the ground, which I think is just amazing. The dense biology of that soil, the animals, the trees, the micro and macrobiology made the whole system thrive. And when a system is thriving in that way with that biodiversity, life brings forth more life, and the health of the whole system is resilient to climate shocks. So when we're looking at Ireland now, which is 2 to 3% forested, so massive deforestation, that soil can't hold when the water comes. So healthy, living, biodiverse soil has a spongy quality to it that can hold water in ways that this can't. So as I'm listening to like the named storm warnings coming in on the weather, and we look at the floods that have been hitting Ireland and will hit Ireland with greater frequency, it's actually urgent to take this on now or 10 years ago. So When we think of that, so traditional land practices, languages of land, ways of being and relating to each other that have been extinguished, have been replaced by ones that were imported by other cultures. And it was really based on economics of extraction, whether it's, the monocropped plantations of trees that are devoid of biodiversity right now we see across the Irish landscape. I was reading Blind Boy's book because I'm a big fan of his work. And in it, he has in the beginning of the book a quote from the Topographia Hibernica, which is an account of the landscape and people of Ireland written by this Welsh guy who was here after the last Norman invasion in around 1100. And he wrote, and this could have been written about any one of our peoples who have been colonized. The Irish are a rude people, subsisting on the produce of their cattle only and living themselves like animals. Their pastures are very rare and there is scarcely any land sown. There are large tracts that are naturally furtive and productive. This people inhabit a country so remote from the rest of the world, they are thus secluded from the civilized nations, and they learn nothing and practice nothing but the barbarism in which they are born and bred. So these kinds of dehumanizing words were uttered around the world by colonial entities and continue today as Palestinians are referred to as mosquitoes or children of the darkness and as they face genocide. These same words send a poisonous story that creates damage internally that gets registered through generations. Aimé Césaire, the African decolonial scholar, describes the impact in his critical essay that everyone needs to read right now because it's probably the most relevant piece of literature to today's event, Discourse on Colonialism. And in it, he says, I am talking of millions of men who've been skillfully injected with fear, inferiority complexes, trepidation, servility, despair, and abasement. So if that's the culture you're coming from, where that's been somehow permeated in the language or structures around you, it will get into your cells, and we're going to talk about how. As we will see, the stories we tell are probably the most important thing. They matter so deeply. They can injure us, and they can also heal. So as you listen to what I'm going to share about inflammation, it's important that you realize that all the processes that I'm describing are actually reversible. It's incredible. The tipping point goes both ways, okay? So harmful narratives can create lasting damage in how the body works. History and dynamics of power actually sediment into our bodies. In the same way, empowering narratives can show us a way to expand our capacity to care and love. It can show us what sovereignty and dignity, that those things can literally heal us. Empowering stories can show us the impact of our most wildest imaginings. And this is a time where we need to start engaging that as a part of our educational practice. So the inflammatory response, we're all going to get a little immunology 101 here. How many medical students are there? Most people? Oh my God. Okay. So this is very lay people. I'll try not to scare you. So the immune system has this ancient response. It's conserved throughout all mammals, that when the body encounters damage or the threat of damage, the immune system activates and it calls a whole host of cellular mediators, different cells, to the site of that damage to repair the damage. And what it does is it heals. If it got a paper cut, it heals the wound. And when the wound is healed, the inflammatory response goes quiet. However, when damage signals keep coming and coming from many different ways, the inflammatory response does not go quiet. It stays active. And that damage signal keeps recruiting cellular mediators, activated macrophages, and they keep secreting inflammatory molecules. And then what you get is what's called a chronic inflammatory or a sterile inflammatory state. And if you look at the diseases I treat as a hospital medicine doctor, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, which is not a normal way of aging. You look at chronic kidney disease now, kidney fibrosis, liver fibrosis, even severe COVID. These diseases are all chronic inflammatory diseases. Heart attacks, strokes, these diseases all have inflammation and chronic inflammation as a part of how the disease develops, which to me, what I was calling the colonized syndrome is actually chronic inflammatory disease, the burden of chronic inflammatory disease. And it's true that people who come from communities that have been deeply oppressed, have the highest burden of chronic inflammatory disease. Now, in medical school, we learn a lot about genetics, the genetic predisposition to this and the genetic predisposition to that. But in fact, when it comes to chronic inflammatory disease and the likelihood that you're going to develop, the exposome, which is the sum of all of your exposures in your life, and actually even goes backwards to before your life, as Colin was saying, the things that are imprinted on your genes through epigenetic processes. The exposome is more predictive of whether or not you're going to develop that heart attack or stroke. Okay, so if you are in a community where you're told that the police are bad and they're there to kill you, like our Black community in the United States, when you're hearing that story as a child, you're told that the world is not safe. And that's an important story for a young Black man to hear because the world is not safe for them. That stress causes an inflammatory response, a chronic smoldering inflammatory response. So history, Ireland's history and those stories that were told in that, that writing from long ago, how do those attitudes persist in the Irish imagination? What is required to excise it and compost it, right? Structures of power, the stories were told, and even our cosmologies. So there was a study of First Nations people in so-called Canada that showed that First Nations people who remembered their language and had a sense of cultural continuance were actually protected from developing type 2 diabetes, which is amazing to me as a physician, that language somehow protected someone from youth suicide. So what is that? That to me is very interesting. So the immune system is actually harmonizing to the exposome. So if the exposome is toxic, you're going to get inflammatory disease. But if the exposome is built with care, what are the possible outcomes? And that is what I see as like the extent of our, like the joyful imaginings of what we could be doing. So shallow medicine is what I learned in medical school. It does not have the explanatory power that we need. I mean, 60% of the heart attacks I see as a doctor are caused by what we call the traditional risk factors like smoking and high blood pressure. That leaves 40% that's something else. And that something else can be explained through deep medicine. So deep medicine is looking at what are the things around the body. It's locating the pathology not in the body. There's not something wrong with you. You can't diet and exercise your way out of a planet on fire. We have to look at what's causing that planetary fire and how do we structure the world around us to invite health to come forward. So I've really started to understand health as an emergent phenomenon, not as a property of an individual. And when one system is healthy, the whole thing thrives, which is very exciting. What's happening, and we'll just zip through this because I know y'all might not want to geek out on this as much as I like to. So these are our replicating cells that are not our germline cells. So your skin cells, breast tissue, the duct cells, the lining of the vessels of the heart. So a toxic exposome creates these damage signals on a replicating cell that leads to these cellular changes. Those cellular changes are damage. That is accumulating damage through this toxic exposure. When a cell is damaged through toxic exposure, it stops replicating and it enters an early senescence, which just means early aging, premature aging of a replicating cell. Cells that age early through damage undergo a remodeling of their genetic material, and they go on to express this phenotype, or they become little factories of pro-inflammatory modulators. And we see these cells, they're called SASP cells, or senescence associated secretory phenotype cells, in all of the tissues where we have inflammatory disease. So in diabetes, we see SASP cells in the pancreas. In cardiovascular disease, we're seeing it in the endothelial cells lining the blood vessels. In Alzheimer's, we're seeing it in our astrocytes, in our microglial cells. We're seeing it in our liver cells. And interestingly, people who had severe COVID, who got hit with COVID and just went right to the ICU, had higher levels of these SASP cells circulating, which to me showed that they were accumulating damage over their whole lives. And then you got a match like COVID and they just exploded on fire. So that to me shows like, well, okay, if that toxic exposome is something that's designed, we can actually just redesign it. Oh, and this didn't work out. Okay, so I'm sorry, this looks very silly. All right. My arrows did not translate. So this is our food system today. So I'm just going to go around and say what our food system is based in. So what we're doing with the deep medicine circle, we're like, okay, structural change for structural disease. Structural disease here is our food system. We're focusing on our food system because food is a great way to bring people together. Everyone likes to eat, to heal our community. We feed them good food, to heal the earth. We got to deal with climate change, and to really bring people together, right? It's the perfect thing to look at deep medicine. So with our food system today in the United States, it's based on stolen land. Here in Ireland, private property was an invention of colonialism. So even though there were territorial dynamics, they weren't the same. There were commons. So stolen land, we get large scale operations and big ag subsidies in the United States. So we have tons of cows and tons of chickens, and we got Roundup on all the corn. We got pesticides. We have fossil fuel based inputs. So the farming systems that we use right now can't run without fossil fuels, and Rockefeller made sure that was the case. We get air and water pollution. The soil fertility drops. So soil that is dead does not hold water, and that's important in California because we're in a drought while you guys are in. It's important here too. You get carbon dioxide loss as they till the soils in these huge farms. You get a loss of water retention. Microbial biodiversity falls, which means as you're eating food, you're eating dead food. The food is not alive. You're getting less nutrient density. So in order to cycle micronutrients from the soil into a carrot, you need actually a whole system of microbial interactions that don't exist anymore in the average farm. You get decreased yields, so they're pumping the yield, they're pumping the fields with more fertilizers. You get pesticide residues. We can talk about that at another lecture. Often dietary chemicals are put in to make the food look better or taste better. In the United States, we exploit our farm workers. A lot of them are undocumented, so it's sort of like a de facto enslavement of people, and then erasure of the indigenous systems there in California, where I live. And what happens is like profit leaves the system, okay? And what you see as a result of that is climate change, damaged soils, inequities, food insecurity, vulnerability, fire, drought, okay? This is what's happening in California. Oh, this is funny. All right, so this is what we are working with the Deep Medicine Circle, and we call this work Farming as Medicine. So instead of anything leaving the circle, everything is going back in. So our work starts with Landback. We return land to California Native people, and we work with them. So agroecological farmers working with indigenous people on bringing together forms of farming and indigenous land practice that bridge and create new ways of doing things, which has been awesome. We actually frame our farmers and we pay them like healthcare workers. So our farmers are getting professional development grants, they're getting stipends for their growth. They're also leaders in our community because we believe that our health starts in the soil and how healthy our soil is and how healthy our food is. So they are actually the leading edge of this work, which is really exciting to see. And we actually bring medical students, nursing students, and doctors to learn with the farmers, which is super exciting. We see indigenous sovereignty, people learning, bringing back their medicines of fire and water and salmon care. We see biodiversity, water retention, increased carbon sequestration. We don't have pollution on our farms. Our nutrient density is way better than even the organic farm next door, and we can talk about that. We're climate adapting seeds, and then our food becomes prebiotic and probiotic, the way food is supposed to be. You pull a carrot out of a ground that's teeming in microbes, people are going to get that exposure. So what we're seeing already in the first 3 years of our work is health of the whole system. So our Farming as Medicine program has 4 parts, and I'll just briefly go through them. The first one is Landback, or remembering. So if colonialism fractured our relationships to land and each other, decolonization is the act of remembering, bringing the members back together, bringing people back to land, bringing our ways of caring back to each other. Number 2 is farmers are our health stewards, right? Like I mentioned, they're our frontline healthcare workers. We decommodify all the food. We take it out of the market economy. If the capitalist system caused the Irish famine, we don't want to see that happening again. So we just threw that away. The 4th part is when food belongs back to the people and land and relationship, that's how it truly becomes medicine. So we work on two farms. One of them is down here in the center, in the bottom. This one is called Zukachim, which is the name of the ancestral village that is in that watershed. Straight up at the top is the Pacific Ocean. So we're about a mile in from the ocean. It's beautiful. You're all welcome to come visit. And that land is going back to California Ohlone people, the Confederation of Ohlone people. And so it's about 38 acres, and there's a riparian corridor that goes through it. This is the creek that goes through it, the San Gregorio. It's called the San Gregorio Creek. There was obviously another name, and we're looking at bringing beaver back to this creek because rivers with beavers have 9 times the amount of water. They hold 9 times the amount of water. They saturate the land, and when fire burns through there, as it should, because it is medicine on the land, the fire burns low and slow and actually regenerates the seeds that need to come forward in the medicines. So salmon and beaver are coming back here. This is the land when we first got there. So that field had been blasted with paraquat, which is a neurotoxin, for about 40 years. It was fallow for about 8 years. And the first thing we did was do a site assessment to see where we found a village site because we were seeing bones and shells coming up with the gopher turbulations. So we found out where we could farm, where we couldn't farm. And then we just started taking soil data to see, okay, what happens when we start taking care? And what we're seeing is just, oh my God, it's just so incredible and so beautiful. Like the proof is in the soil, which has been phenomenal. So here you can see our clover pathways. We use ways of regenerating soil and regenerating fertility on the land that are all based in agroecological practices. So we use nature, we call it the nature assist. We work with her to grow. We also work on a 1-acre rooftop farm, which is the largest rooftop farm west of the Mississippi in California. We grew about 20,000 pounds of organic food on about 3/4 acre. This is in the middle of a food desert in Oakland, where the folks who receive this food actually don't have any access to organic food. It is a super beautiful place. We call it our living classroom. And we've been teaching high school students now in environmental science about this work that we do. This is a farmer who designed, built, and educates through our work, Benjamin Farr. Full disclosure, I had babies with this man. If you get near a farmer or a musician, you will either have a hoe in your hand or you will be schlepping guitars. So just beware. It's like a tornado. They suck you in. And so Benjamin designed these farms, and he's going actually around the entire United States teaching people how to transition from like this big agribusiness to regenerative organic, which is urgent that we train people how to do this. So Landback and remembering. So on California, there was a genocide. So California state paid, $5 a scalp and $50 a head to clear the land of California Native people when gold was discovered there. Before then, it was Mexico, both when they were shooting Native people at will, and before then, it was Spain, and people were, enslaved into the mission system, and it was through that enslavement and forced conversion that people started to forget who they were. They forgot their language. They forgot their ways of tending land. But that land where we live, so when Europeans first got there, they just commented in these diaries about how rich and fertile it was. And actually Portola, when he came up the coast, he landed at the mouth of the river, and everyone got sick, and they camped there for several days. And it was the people from our village site, Zukachim, who came down with their food and medicine. And there are still berry patches, and there are still patches of food on that land, native food, that you could see were tended by these people 150 years ago, which is incredible. And that memory of that genocide, we believe, is alive in the soil. We believe soil has memory. It's a living entity. And so our question is, how do we heal from these legacies, as Colin was talking about, the babies who are here in the land, these profound histories of how the ways in which we care for our children was actually taken from us and replaced with another way. So what we did, the first thing we did on the land, those are two of our elders, Bev and Greg Castro, placing one of California's most important foods, the oak tree and the acorn, back in the land. That was the first thing they wanted to plant. And so we've been reforesting with the oak savanna. And then we have been bringing community around to do that. So it was a beautiful day of ceremony. This here is Sage LaPena. She is from the Shasta area. She's one of the last people who was raised as a child by her elders, learning how to talk and communicate with the native plants in California. She's a plant medicine woman. And then Charlene Eigen Vasquez, who's a founder of the Confederation of Ohlone People. Here's Charlene flanked by her daughter and her granddaughter. So they've been bringing amazing things back to the land in terms of story and community groups and schools to learn what happened here and to learn how we can go forward in a different way. So here I am with a group of, these are a group of Apple engineers who came to learn with us about the land, and we're touching the ground where the village site is. And so for them, they were profoundly moved, these people who work at computer desk jobs, to say, how can I embed this knowledge into my Apple Map program? And how can I do, and this is the opportunity to be really creative with people about how we can all participate in the great narrative turning that is happening right now, where we all get to reconnect. Here's Sage leading a group of people reconnecting to each other through ceremony and reconnecting to land. This is a traditional way that California Native folks prepare their salmon on these redwood spikes in an open pit. So remembering how we prepared our food, remembering what our food sources were, honoring those food sources and participating. And here we have a traditional, what's called a sweat lodge. It was made with willow bark that was harvested in the traditional way from the land and tied with the bark. And they held their first few ceremonies there, which was beautiful. These ceremonies have not been done on this land for 200 years, and they're coming back. And that has profound effects for all of us. I'll just briefly mention when I was there with the pipeline, it was the grannies who called me out there to do this medic healer work. And after, you know, everyone was beaten up by these cops, they were asking, like, how do we create a clinic to decolonize food and medicine? They really understood that, first of all, you can't just get healthy by taking more insulin for the diabetes. We have to look at what created the diabetes? Well, when the dam went up over that river, it flooded the cottonwood forest. When the cottonwood forests were flooded, we couldn't harvest our food. When we couldn't harvest our food, we were sitting around and not hunting anymore. The buffalo were gone. They were extirpated. Then they brought in the commodity foods, and we all started eating this crap. And their whole food system was gone, right? And so the grannies were like, let's create a clinic. And what turned out from a clinic was actually now this whole group of people who are bringing back the buffalo kill. So they just harvested and you know, killed and prepared a buffalo with their whole community in the way that they used to for hundreds of years. They've just brought back coming of age ceremonies, again, that haven't been practiced in 200 years. So in these acts of remembering who we are, remembering the ways in which we used to relate to these tempos of life, to the things that sustained us in relationship to the land and where we are, they are seeing a vitality in their community and a resiliency to some of the problems and the issues that come up in our colonized culture. The second part is farmers are health stewards. This is Antonio and Manuel. We call them the uncles of the farm, los tíos de la finca. They both worked in what I call chemically addicted farms for about 40 years. And they saw our job posting and they were like, hell yes, we'll do this. They are incredible wealth of knowledge, and they teach our young farmers about some of the things like milpa, which is a traditional form of indigenous farming of corn, beans, and squash from their region of Mexico. And so it's just beautiful to see these men who have never had a position to lead in ecological work and health work, now teaching, you know, doctors and medical students and other people what health looks like. So these are our rooftop farmers and some more of our farmers. And here we do a job training where we're teaching young people how to farm and how to grow food in all these different kinds of places. That's a doctor in between shifts who came up to the rooftop, got her hands in the dirt, and it's been amazing. And there's a whole host of pediatricians who are in the field learning about the importance of how our communities get our food. So what we're seeing, again, as I mentioned, is our soils. So the soil is alive. It's a living entity. It has microfauna and macrofauna. And here you can just see this is two seasons of data from spring to fall. In our cultivated field, we're seeing just an explosion of nematode activity, which is an indication of our biodiversity. So even just in one growing season, we're already seeing how the cultivation practices we're using through agroecology are stimulating not just growth of our food, but growth of the food for the microbes. Here you see bulk density is decreasing in our cultivated fields. And bulk density basically means, how much work we have to do to get through to our soil. So once you start inoculating the soil with love and care, it starts doing the work for you. It makes the farming easier, which is so cool. We work with soil and we work with water. So it's not unusual when so in California, we're water poor, and here in Ireland too, to think about how do you properly plant the water so it doesn't wash away your topsoil as you're trying to reforest this island. So we are often, in the fields with the elements, learning how the water moves, where it wants to move, and how to soak that lens. And what we found in our just few seasons of farming is already our farm has been rated top in the entire California Central Coast in our conservation measures. So we're using less water, which means we're pumping less from the creek, which means the salmon in the creek have more. So we're farming with a river instead of against it. Often you'll think, in an industrial framework, that farmers are sort of positioned against ecologists, like in some sort of battle. But we're showing that actually farmers start using nature's assist to make the farm more productive and actually healthier for everybody. That's one of our retention ponds. It's so beautiful there. You all have to come visit. This is compost tea. So this is one of the ways we do fertility on our site, is creating a tea. It's kind of like kombucha for your plants. So we brew up this microbrew. It's like witchcraft is lovely. You brew up this microbrew and then you feed the soil. And this kind of gets to like a central tenet of farming as medicine, is that through care of the other, you're cared for yourself. And that is just a phenomenal, beautiful thing that soil will teach you. If you care for the soil, it'll care for you. If you feed the soil, it'll feed you. Our farmers engage in reflective practice and storytelling. So as we've been doing this work, we're assembling this massive toolkit to share with community groups around the world. So the decommodification of food is actually really important. What we call so-called famines are actually very much engineered colonial policies of starvation. And those policies have been driven by the capitalist market economy. So we really wanted to see what would it look like to have a food system that actually existed in what we're calling the care economy. That's not based on for-profit anything, but is based on, let's move public funds, let's move money into the care economy. And our work is really based on providing a structure for moving forth the Black Panthers Party survival agenda, which is that everybody eats. And we don't want just everyone to eat crappy food. We want everyone to eat food that's going to regenerate their own microbiology in their gut, in their health. So here are some of our partners. We grew it, like I said, 50,000 pounds of organic food that we gave away for free. We have several different distribution partners and hubs. And what we're seeing is that people are changing what they eat. People are changing how they eat. People are excited to get this food. So we have data in medicine that show, well, if you give people free food, they don't really change their behaviors. Well, they're giving them crap. If you give people like the best food you can grow, they will eat it. And actually the kids go crazy for our lettuce and celery. And they call this the bougie lettuce. So we work with people called Poor Magazine. You should look them up online. One of my greatest teachers is a formerly unhoused woman activist, Lisa Tiny Gray Garcia. And Tiny says, we just love your bougie lettuce. And the last part is when food has been returned to the economy of relationships, that's when it's medicine. So we don't do the prescriptive, you've got diabetes, eat this red pepper. We don't do that like that kind of reduction. We see food as a system and the human body as a system and our relationships as systems. So food as medicine for us is how we re-enter our sacred relationality, our duties to care for one another and to care for the earth. And so we eat really well, and we feed our community really well, and we teach people about plant-based, more plant-based diets, which is been incredible for all of us. So the care economy. So I call this, we're part of the care revolution. Who here is part of the care revolution? Raise your hand. I want to see. Okay, come on, you guys. It's our only chance to survive this planet. Okay, so we are part of the care revolution. We want to see an economics that is based in an economy and practice of care. And what we're developing right now is taking the data that we've synthesized over the last 3 years and building what we're calling the Oakland Community Food Public Utility. So how do we take public dollars from agriculture, from healthcare, from climate initiatives, from sugary drinks taxes? I want to start a tax on processed food in Oakland. How do we move that into this utility and then allocate it to all the groups that are already doing the amazing work and start expanding that work? So we have now maybe 10 urban farms in Oakland. We want 200 over the next 10 years. We want to train everyone in the Oakland High School to go through learning how to do indigenous land stewardship and agroecological farming as a way to start rewilding our city and bringing the best medicine to the place that's the most needing it. We just got this economic data from our people who do that. So everyone's like, you're crazy, you can't do this. I'm like, yes, we can, look, we did. So if you take, so right now, if you like the poor people industry is like you pay the food bank $380,000 to go to a wholesaler and say, okay, we're gonna give you this money, give us X pounds of food. So X pounds of food costs $380K to this wholesaler, and they go and they give the X pounds of food and they bring it to the distribution sites. You get lots of profit to that wholesaler. The trickle down doesn't really work. Don't let Reagan know. The income for the farmers, they get screwed. Someone gets like either the earth or the labor gets pinched in the economics of capitalism. But if you do farming as medicine, the same poundage of food, the same amount of beets and carrots and lettuces costs $350,000. All that money goes to the farmers. You get the farmers doing way more activities. So you're able to employ more farmers and employ them better. And they get the soil healthy, the water healthy. They're building pollinator habitat. They're rewilding. I mean, on that rooftop farm, I have hawks and hummingbirds. I have earthworms, ladybugs. It's incredible. It's a whole ecosystem. You build it and they all show up. It's incredible. You get community engagement. I have 16-year-olds wanting to be farmers. Okay, do you guys have that problem here in Oakland? I mean, in Ireland, I don't think so, right? We have an aging out of farmers right now. That's a real problem. We have to make farming sexy and cool. And this is how we do it, is we feed our people, okay? We got climate resiliency. We've got land access, okay? So people who haven't had access to land get land. We have indigenous people teaching and being in community with non-native people. We are becoming friends in a way that I wish we could have hundreds of years ago. But the most exciting thing for me is seeing the youth like super, super excited. This is not a doom and gloom story. This is not like, oh my God, we're all screwed. This is like, hey, let's become nutritionists. Let's become doctors. Let's become nurses. Let's become farmers. Let's become cooks. Let's work together. And the interdisciplinary nature of it makes it honestly the coolest thing that these young people have seen. So from the young people around the tree to the pediatricians ready to launch their careers, we have all these different people coming together, coming back to land, learning about soil, learning about how we heal the soil, how we take care of one another, what that brings us, how we rest on land, how we stay together. That's my son, Bija. I just miss him so much. And these school groups are just it's just remarkable to see the kinds of engagement they get. That when we work together and when we build together, we see an incredible abundance that goes straight to the people who need it the most. We see this rich biodiversity explode, and we see a possibility for a better world. For myself as a physician, what excites me the most is that the exposure of all this microbial richness in the fields ends up on our bodies, ends up on our dust in our bookshelves at home. And eventually we see just a greater biodiversity in the gut. And so what is important to recognize is that the biodiversity in the gut is actually what trains our immune system to kind of tune to inflammation. So a biodiverse gut resists chronic inflammatory disease. It's virtually non-existent in the Yanomami people who have the most biodiverse guts on planet Earth. I have a friend who is Indigenous Ohlone from the Amazon. Her community, they are the uncontacted people. When she got COVID through the community 3 times, they all just went deeper into the forest. No one died. No one has long COVID. It's like non-existent there. The way in which they are resilient because of their relationships to the microbial world around them is very different. It doesn't mean we all have to go live in the Amazon, but it means there's a lot of things we could be doing right now to recapture our biodiversity. So through song, through story, through ceremony, through discussions, through healing our relationships to one another and the web of life, we see an incredible abundance. We see a possibility for a world of sanity, of cultural and climate sanity. This is our family at the Deep Medicine Circle. They all say, hey, they're like so excited to come to Ireland one day and see this work in action here. So we are seeding new things for the future. We are working, here is an example. It's not just fairy tale. This is our riparian corridor. At the bottom of that ledge there is our creek. This is full of invasive species, okay? That's an invasive ivy. Through our native friends' practices and prayers, and through the way fire has come to the land, California Native people have told us when fire burns, 3 years later, water comes back. Everyone thought they were crazy. They suppressed fire. Well, in 2020, fire ripped through California. Do y'all remember that? Our sky turned orange. Our sky turned orange, okay? Fire was everywhere. 3 years later, this is what happened. 3 years later, the creek rose 2 million gallons a minute were going past me at that moment right there, okay? There was water everywhere. There was water everywhere. And what we saw was that it ripped off all the invasives. And now we have like 10-foot stands of nettle back there that we use for our rope making and fiber making. And we have all of the plants that our California Native people want to be planting there to make a basket weeding garden, to bring back those ancient practices of remembering land and plants. This is Lola. She's my assistant at the Deep Medicine Circle. She's Pomo. Her dad was raised as a Pomo language speaker, a tribe leader up north. And when I think about this work, I think about her. I think about like, Lola wants to be on that land and weave those baskets again. And if we can help young people see a way forward, we've done our job. This is my little guy. He's got ancestors here in Ireland. They're from the Redmond clan. So they had to escape the British because they were like banging on the colonizer here. So they escaped the United States, and now he's over there. But this is why I do this work, because I cannot rest. I cannot rest until I see systems out there that pave a way for cultural and climate sanity. So how do we reawaken the radical imagination here in Ireland? I have been in touch with these amazing people. You should check out their work. Jimmy O'Brien Billings. He has a website called Gaelic Reexistence. He's doing beautiful work on decolonization of land. He's a scholar, got his master's at UDC. Talav Beo is the peasant farming organization here that's doing agroecology in Ireland. Lucia Hagen with Wild Awake, she's doing reawakening ancestral practices around land here in Ireland. And it's been beautiful talking with these people and sharing ideas about how we do this work in our specific locations and support one another. So that is the end. That was a lot longer than I thought, and I hope you all were okay.
But that was amazing. Thank you so much. I don't know if we're going to get kicked out of here in 8 minutes, but maybe if there's 1 or 2 questions or comments. Oh, okay. Well.
Hi, my name is Keishi and I'm Canadian. So I have a bit of background in the sort of Indigenous practices and the decolonization that's taking place there. And I'm Sri Lankan. I was born in Sri Lanka. And I guess my question is, as someone who's not natively indigenous, how did you come into those spaces and show up with sort of the vulnerability to want to like help and change the systems, but also recognize that you're of a different background, and even as an immigrant, the land isn't yours, and you've shown up to profit from the land?
That's great question. So how do I weaponize my settler privilege in service of the Native people? Yeah. So that's just what I do. And that is what we have to do. In that, like, morally, there's no moral way for me to be on stolen settled land without working to shift those dynamics. So I showed up to a land occupation. I brought oranges and juice, and I sat and I listened and learned, and I showed up whenever they asked me to show up. And then I used my white coat privilege as a physician to show up whenever they asked me to show up. And I continued to do that for years and years. And through that, developed friendships and partnerships and constantly learning, constantly learning. It's not easy. It can be humbling to the hugest degree, because I don't know what it's like to be Native in that land. I do know what it's like to be ancestrally impacted by colonialism. And so our political understanding is what draws us together, just like my homeboy here. So when we understand our shared histories, then we understand what solidarity means. When we understand how to bring together love for one another and care, that I actually love that land and care for that land. They feel that. It's not, you don't have to, it's just what's real in your heart. So I just showed up, keep showing up. And I take the beatings when they come. So like when I'm out of line, the aunties put me in line, and I need that. God, I don't know what I'm doing. No, there's no book for this. There's no book for like preparing for climate change. There's no path for that. You just got to show up and be like, please teach me, and be humble enough to accept those instructions.
Hi, my name is David Lynch. I'm from the Medical Independent. Most of our readers will be doctors. So if a doctor was kind of interested in your ideas, what would you say they should do in terms of their relationship with their patients and then relationship with their colleagues? And secondly, do you think there's enough in medical education for doctors and other healthcare workers about this kind of synergy between the land and health, and what more could be done? And is there any kind of good examples of that, do you see?
Yes. So what's so exciting is that we have a head of a medical school here who is so excited, right? So will Trinity become the place, like the place on planet Earth that really advances this planetary human web of life health? It's urgent. And maybe Colin, you can speak to this.
So one of the things you learned hopefully from this talk was, that stress is a thing that causes negative effects in your body. I'm really stressed now. And I can't remember who said this famous saying, why are humans the only mammals that are animals that cry and laugh? And it's because they're the only ones who understand the difference, the way things are and the way they could be. And that's the gap between the ambition and the execution of something like this, is a really, really difficult area. And I am stressed. I am stressed because I know that this needs to be done. I know the answer is deeply in this area. And I know that there are many good people, very, very, very brilliant people in our medical school who won't see that as a priority for the next generation of doctors. So thank you for that. You've given me that challenge. Anyway.
I wanted to build on her question as a de facto member of the oppressor class, as a 61-year-old white American woman, but who has had the pleasure of commuting with my ancestors here in Ireland 3 times over the past year, where when I put my feet on the ground, I feel like I'm home. How do you cultivate someone like me and people like me who do this work in the States, that humility. That is something I do that I've had very little success at in terms of getting through those layers of acculturation, of niceness and white saviorism and all that. How do you, are there any words of wisdom you can impart to those of us like me?
Yeah, just don't be white. Because you're not. You're not. Like, white is an invention. Like, y'all come from some pretty righteous tribes here in Europe, right? And where are those tribal lineages? Who are they? Who are those people? They were amazing people. We have had our identities so shorn from us, but they were actually quite specific and they were land-based. So I think that when we actually really understand that white is a identity concept, like Irish people weren't white when they came to the United States. They weren't. But then they became white. Like, why? Right? So the concept of whiteness is something that needs to be interrogated. Even the identity of Irish needs to be interrogated. I mean, I know the identity of Indian should definitely be interrogated. We have a fascist in power, like, you know, using that. But we weren't India. We were these feudal different principalities and regions, and I'm Punjabi, I'm from Patiala. Like, my ancestors are specific, but we become deracinated in the modern era and context as if our ancestors don't matter. Remember your ancestors, find out who they are, talk to them, be with them. They can hear you, they're with you, they're in your cellular DNA. And so when we remember these things, our imaginations become richer, our stories become richer, who we are. And so that for me has been very humbling, is to always connect this work to my ancestors. When I get invited to California Native ceremony, I show up in my ancestral clothes. Like, I don't show up in anything else. I'm like, I'm bringing my grandmother, my great I'm bringing everyone with me. We're all going into that lodge, right? And so that's important because that matters. But it also means I was born in that land. So the ancestors there welcomed me and I have something to offer them, right? And so my duties are to listen, to learn to listen. So that's the practice of every great doctor and musician, is like to listen to what the land is telling you, to what people are telling you. So that's all I can say. I'm not great at it, but I practice. And I also notice that doctors and musicians practice, like never get it right.
Hi, hello. Hi, over here. My name is Brendan. I'm a psychiatrist here in the School of Medicine. Thank you for your talk and indeed the work. It is all direct work. It is things you are doing with people. Can I move us up to the political system? Do you see a role for engagement with that? Because it is a cold, hard fact that our elected representatives probably have more opportunity to produce this kind of positive change, in addition to the direct actions you're discussing. Does that make sense? That there is this other level of engagement which could produce change?
That's a great question. Yes. So structural change involves working with the political system, and our food utility, we're working directly with the city of Oakland and the politicians there. We have most of the people on city council down to pass an ordinance once we get it all mapped out. So yes, this involves policymakers and lawyers and farmers. But what's so exciting is when you bring all those different kinds of people together, the boundaries of what you can imagine becomes much greater. So Colin, you said to me the other day that, you know, you feel like 90% of your job is just getting everyone in the room to get on the same page. People who do that are extremely important right now because they're the ones who are inviting who's in the room, right? And so the more that person has an imagination, the luckier we all will benefit. So you got to keep them here. I don't know where that provost. Yeah, you got to keep them here.
Thank you, Rupa. That was extraordinary. I suppose I wanted to ask you a little bit about the farmers that you're working with. My experience working with farmers here in Ireland as an artist, not as a farmer, it has been that for many of them, particularly those who aren't caught up in the agro-industrial complex. For those who are still farming on a small scale way, the pain of being constantly told that if they don't buy into the system, they're stupid. There's an amazing paper by a farmer, academic, philosopher, whose name I can't remember, called Farming Made Her Stupid.
Oh.
That speaks really well to knowledge that can't be capitalized and the way that it's regarded by the powers that be that you've just spoken about. And I think there's a huge potential in an institution like Trinity to create the public space for that coming together of different kinds of knowledge. Because, you know, you spoke really well about the psychic shock, the psychic trauma of the exercise of biopolitical power and how it resonates through generations. And the only way that that will be healed is by acknowledging that it happened, not that it's some kind of dirty, shameful secret that needs to be hidden away.
Yes.
So, Colin, if you can take up the challenge, it would be great.
Yes. Thank you. You know, to that end, when you think about how this system works, what is the engine that drives our current economic system? It's desperation. So if food, medicine, and shelter are kept somewhat scarce and unavailable, which they're all unavailable in the United States, then people will sell their labor. And there's a remarkable quote we put in my book from the economists at the time of the Irish starvation, where a government official in Cork was suggesting that they just pay the Irish laborers more because the food was being sent to England where it could get a higher price. But why don't we just pay the Irish workers more so they could pay for the food that's grown in Ireland? And the economist wrote, "Ha ha, how foolish you are that you would pay these people more money. Like, don't you understand that it's their suffering that drives this engine?" So the suffering is not accident, it's a function of the design. So we have to redesign it. And most food that's grown and eaten by human beings on planet Earth is grown on a farm that has 5 to 30 acres of land. So small holding farmers, actually grown through agroecology, are feeding the world. It's not the story you hear. Big agribusiness creates food waste, but the most food that's grown that people eat, especially in the global south, is grown on agroecological farms that are 5 to 30 acres big. So we don't need more bigger farms. We need to break up those big farms and return that land to people who want to participate in restarting that ecological engine. So.
Hello. Thank you very much for that. My name is Tanya King, and I'm the CEO of one of Trinity's partners organizations, Peamount Healthcare. We're a rehabilitation hospital. And about 18 months ago, we planted 4,500 native trees on our land. Wow. Of that, there's 3 orchards. So I'm really interested in this, really interested how we can move this forward, because for me, the vision was about having an area that was accessible for our patients to enjoy. So to bring this the step further, not just about what they were eating, but how this could actually contribute to an improvement in their overall health through their rehabilitation. So I suppose I'm putting the challenge. Colin knows about me. Colin knows what we're hoping to do. And I suppose just to say that that opportunity is there even within our healthcare facilities.
You also have a full working farm.
I have.
It's not just
200-acre farm.
It's a 200-acre farm. I mean, if there was ever a laboratory for
Let's go.
If Trinity wants to support us, or someone wants to support us, we can go down that road.
Amazing. That's amazing.
My name's Nora Campbell. I'm in Trinity Business School. So one thing that businesses are really good at is listening to something like this and saying absolutely everything about it is wonderful. And it's a really rich source of value for us as agribusiness organizations. We can take this and do a kind of pick and mix on it, empty of it of any deep meaning, but represent it to our publics as Indigenous or as local or any other one of these things. So how does a system which you're proposing here protect itself from that voracious co-optation that is endemic to capitalism?
I think you just keep it decommodified. So it doesn't make money, it creates health. And that's the difference. So if a business wants to get involved, that'd be awesome. You guys are really organized. But it's not to extract. It's not an extractive model. It's a regenerative model. And that's what we need our business schools to start teaching. What are the regenerative business practices that return health to a system and wealth to a system without any part of it leaking out to one person, but that the wealth is held in common. That's the commonwealth. That's an important concept. It seems to have gotten lost somewhere in the translation, but that would be great to start a business school class. Is that what you're volunteering to do? On how to innovate regenerative systems in business. Thank you. You do. Excellent.
Okay, I think, Rupa's been going now for, I know we have a few more minutes left, but I think in fairness to her, it's been, and she was up at 8 this morning talking to the doctors. So that was an involuntary laugh there.
That's a cackle.
Okay, so look, I think there's, I would just like to thank Rupa. I'd like to thank everybody for turning up on a Friday afternoon, obviously. Thank Rupa very much.